Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tax Talk, broadcast by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. My name is Jordan Bateman. I'm the British Columbia Director of the CTF, and joined as always by our Alberta Director, Paige McPherson. Pager, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm so excited that we have Tax Talk back.
I know, and we're using a new platform, so bear with us, folks. Blab went under, so we're using a Zoom meeting. So we'll see how all that goes. But today, Paige and I are joined by our Ontario Director, Christine Van Geyn, the famous CVG, who has been everywhere this week, talking about Kathleen Wynne's total bungling of Ontario hydro costs. That's why we're calling this episode Ontario Hydro. No, she did it. There you go. CVG, how are you doing?
I'm good. You're right. I've been everywhere. I'm in my car right now.
Exactly. All right. So we'll skip some of the usual preamble. We'll get to that later. But we want to talk to CVG while we have her because she's very busy. So Christine, the Ontario government comes through. They suddenly realize hydro rates are too high after, a decade of ratcheting them up. And so they decide to take the provincial sales tax off of it, or the provincial portion of the HST. And then they launch a petition to themselves, congratulating themselves. Am I writing this, reading this story correctly?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what is one of the most bizarre government public relations moves I've ever seen. Kathleen Wynne is petitioning herself for lower hydro rates. And as for, the HST removed from the hydro bills, I would quibble a little. I wouldn't say it's being removed. The HST still applies because they'd need to negotiate with the federal government to have it removed. It still applies, but now taxpayers are paying themselves that money back. So it's really just a taxpayer subsidized rebate of our own money. I don't really know where the government's getting that money, and they frankly don't seem to know where they're getting it either, because the Premier and the Finance Minister, when asked separately, they both gave different stories. The Premier said it's coming from increased revenues, while the Finance Minister said it's coming from a contingency fund. So either they have the money or they think they'll have the money, but either way, you're going to be paying for your own rebate. And of course, you still will have higher bills. Our bills in this province grow at faster than 8% a year. So removing 8% off the bills, maybe it helps you for 1 year, but what about next year when the bills are 8% up again?
That's crazy. I mean, they couldn't even get their talking points straight. Like, if they're going to show no respect for taxpayers, the least they could do is have the decency to at least get their messaging straight as to where the money's coming from.
Yeah, and one of the things that we saw today was the Ontario Liberal Caucus Services had paid for some advertisement. Caucus Services is, of course, the legislative political branch. They do have a taxpayer-funded budget. They are allowed to use that money on partisan activities. Of course, we here at Canadian Taxpayers Federation don't believe they should be doing that. But it probably is within the rules, but they are handing out literature, campaign-style literature on the sidewalks of downtown Toronto, saying, thank goodness for these Liberals giving us our 8% off our HST. But of course, as we all know, it's our own money, and our rates are going to continue to go up. So yeah, they didn't waste any time advertising their grand new policy about nothing.
Oh my God, this is like the stupidest thing I've heard recently, and governments across Canada seem to be competing for it. I mean, we know where the money's coming from. Ontario has the highest subnational debt per capita in Canada, don't they? And maybe
in the world. Aren't they the most indebted subnational government in the world? Maybe Christine, can you confirm that for us?
I can see her, but I can't hear her.
Yeah, having audio issues.
Can you hear me now? Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Ontario has the most debt of any subnational government. That means anything lower than a country, Ontario has the most debt. So more debt than Puerto Rico, which, as we've all seen in the news, is highly indebted. But yeah, Ontario, we reached a new milestone a few weeks ago. The first province ever to reach $300 billion in debt. These are astounding levels of debt. We pay about $1 billion every month just on interest payments. So I know, Paige, you in Alberta, I sometimes see some people in Alberta complaining about the amount of money they spend on interest in your province. Well, just start copying some of Premier Wynne's policies, as Ms. Notley seems to be inclined to do, And you guys can reach our record debt levels too if you keep on that track.
Well, it's funny, on that note, I was on talk radio in Ontario the other day, and the host said, okay, so you guys are blowing $1 billion a month on debt interest payments. And I said, whoa, we're blowing $1 billion a year on debt interest payments, but it was like a, crystal ball into the future in a terrible way as to, we're going down the path of Ontario's direction. And frankly, if you look at, the Fraser Institute pointed this out and it was really helpful, if you look at the numbers, the deficit numbers that Alberta is racking up now when we're facing this big economic hurdle, obviously we've got a big economic crash based on the price of oil, look at that, compare that to Ontario's deficit numbers in 2009 when you guys out there were dealing with the recession because of the crash in manufacturing. Our deficit numbers are actually worse now. So we're actually on track to get even worse. We've got a long way to go, I think, to catch up to the terrible state that Ontario's in. But yeah, we seem to be following your path on the debt and deficits, but also on this, the crazy green energy welfare, corporate welfare stuff.
Yeah, I've seen the Premier Notley's proposing using getting about 30% of the grid in Alberta. They want to get it onto some of this wind and solar power. Well, let me tell you that this is exactly how Ontario got into this mess. Green energy isn't inherently wasteful, but the way the Ontario government procured it was probably the most absurd ways of generating power imaginable. We entered 20-year contracts with small producers, small generators, to feed into our grid in something called the feed-in tariff program. And the government agreed on ratepayers' behalf to generate power for 20 years at 2 and 3.5 times market rates for wind and solar power. So if Rachel Notley is looking into something like that, she should look to Ontario and see the damage that has done, because high hydro rates, they don't just affect you at the household level. I mean, we do have high bills that we pay ourselves, but it also implicates every service that you rely on. Schools, they're responsible for their hydro bills. If they have to spend thousands more on hydro than they otherwise would, that's fewer resources for students. If hospitals have to spend thousands more, tens of thousands more on electricity than they otherwise would, that's fewer resources for patients. That gets the government into wars against doctors about their salaries. So we're seeing all of these consequences play out in every service that people in this province value. And it's not just at the household level, it's in basically every part of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, BC Hydro has the same problem, and it's with these independent power producers, and we're paying it 2.5 or 3 times. Now, fortunately, not as many of them as Ontario, but still BC Hydro swimming in debt, hiking increases. It really comes down to when politicians try to run electricity companies, they turn out to be pretty bad at it. An electricity company on its own would never enter into those kind of contracts with those independent power producers because it costs too much money. They just would do the math and say, we can generate power cheaper this way. Why would we do that? But it's, well-meaning premiers, I suppose, like Gordon Campbell in British Columbia at the time. And it was McGuinty, I think, signed some of those deals, wasn't it? And, they mean well, but then they end up making these political decisions, forcing them on the public power provider, and we all end up paying for it.
Mm-hmm. The thing is that it's been repeatedly pointed out for years that this is what's caused the problem. And the government refuses to get out of the contracts that they can. The government refuses to stop procuring new renewable generation when the Auditor General in repeated reports has stated that this is what's causing the problem. The government even created their own third-party technical branch called the Ontario Power Authority that's supposed to provide technical advice about how to run the electricity sector. Well, the Auditor General found that the government has never taken any of the advice that they pay for from the Ontario Power Authority. So it's really this interventionist, very politicized decision-making process in Ontario that's led to the problems with our electricity grid, and it needs to end. And the solution is not providing people rebates with their own money.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we're starting to see some of those costs in Alberta. Like, just the numbers came out today that shuttering down the coal-fired power plants, which we're doing at a quite aggressive time schedule, similar to how Ontario did, it's going to cost us $2 billion. Renewable subsidies are going to be near $10 billion. That's what Capital Power is estimating in terms of these costs. And those are just preliminary numbers, so who knows what they could really be. But it begs the question of, in Ontario, are they not addressing the root causes here? Like, it seems like Alberta's going down this path. We're getting into the same sort of initial problems that Ontario did. But the Ontario government's, very laughable. Obviously, the petition and all this stuff is very laughable in terms of their Band-Aid solution. But is there any indication that the government wants to address any of these root causes in Ontario?
No, absolutely no direction towards the root causes. In fact, until very recently, the government and the Premier and the Finance Minister and the Energy Minister have all denied that there's a crisis taking place in Ontario, even though tens of thousands of people can't afford to pay their hydro bills. The Finance Minister a few weeks ago or a few months ago said that people's hydro rates are going down. The former Energy Minister said people's energy bills are going down. The former Energy Minister said that individuals are responsible for their own high bills, so use less power and you'll have lower bills. The problem is conservation doesn't actually help lower your bill when conservation actually results in the rates being increased, because with these 20-year contracts, the government is required to pay a certain amount of money to the generators. If people aren't using enough power to actually meet the amount of money the government has promised under these contracts, they have to raise the rates in spite of conservation. So the conservation actually can lead to higher rates and higher bills for people. It's a really strange policy world that we're living in here in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. And you guys have the incoming carbon tax. I mean, do you have any sort of idea what that is going to add? It's the same sort of excuses from the government that you get really across the country. Well, if your carbon tax, if you don't want to pay more carbon tax, just drive less, just heat your home less, or they try to use sort of
put on a sweater, Paige. Put on a sweater.
Yeah, put on your sweater and get your hot cup of tea, and then you won't have to pay the carbon tax. But it's so out of touch, right? Because it's obviously coming from people who it's not going to be a big deal for them if they have to pay a little bit more on the carbon tax, or a lot more on the carbon tax. The people who are making some pretty generous government salaries, but for the rest of the people, it's a big deal. So with people in Ontario already facing these really punishingly high electricity bills, I mean, what are you anticipating in terms of the carbon tax impact?
Yeah, so the government says that the hydro rebate is going to save people about $130 a year, but the government also predicts the carbon tax is going to cost people $156 a year. So at the end of the day, you're paying more. And by the way, that $156, that's the government's estimate. So of course, it's a lowball estimate. Other estimates of what the carbon tax in this province is going to cost an average household is more in the range of $300+ a year, and that's just a start. So if people treat their household as, the cumulative cost of all of my bills, the savings are actually negative. You will be spending more money come January 1st, even when both of these policies come into effect.
Wow.
But you'll have signed a petition to get the Premier to do something. So that's bound to happen.
Signed the government's petition.
Yes.
Is it just that they can build their lists? Like, this is such a strange thing for the government to be doing.
It's just list building.
If the government wants to build a list, or the Liberal Party, it's a Liberal Party petition, right. The Liberal Party wants to create a list of people who care about energy bills, which is everybody in this province. But they just want to get people who are interested in this issue and get their email address and contact information. This is not a real petition. If you want a real petition, go to taxpayer.com and sign ours.
Yeah. It really... This is the one advantage opposition parties have over governments, is that they can do petitions and glean these lists. I mean, governments have the levers of power. They have the wallet, as I'm seeing in British Columbia right now, where we're having funding announcement after funding announcement after funding announcement from the government in order to get reelected. The only thing opposition parties have that an advantage over the government are these petitions that they try to build lists out of, and having fake signed a couple of them. It's shocking how many donation requests you get from the opposition parties when you do. So be warned, folks. That's what happens. All right.
Not surprising.
Christine, we'll let you go. Have a great weekend. Thank you for the cameo appearance of Mishka, the tax fighting dog. If you don't follow Mishka on Instagram.
Yeah, that's the best special guest.
Yeah. Follow Mishka on Instagram. It's all good. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Christine.
All right. And we're going to see what happens when someone leaves the call now, Paige. This is exciting. All right, well, let me just explain really quick. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization dedicated to three things: lower taxes, less waste, and more government accountability. That's what drives all of the communications, research, and advocacy work we do. You can connect with us on Twitter at Jordan Bateman or at Paige MacP, M-A-C-P. And be sure to visit our website at taxpayer.com to see what we're all working on.
And Christine, if you want to follow her on Twitter, C-Van-Geyn, C-V-A-N-G-E-Y-N.
There you go. And facebook.com/taxpayer.com. We are killing it on Facebook, let me tell you. Been very active on there. Lots of video content, lots of discussion about what's happening across the country. So if you're not following us on Facebook, you really are missing out on a ton of the work we're doing. Paige, speaking of Facebook, good story on our Facebook page, and I know you want to talk about it and what's new. What's new with you?
Yeah, definitely. So I have two what's news. So I'm going to first of all talk about what's happening on university campuses. I venture to say that this is happening on university campuses across Canada in one form or another, based on the amount of these types of stories that do come out. But there's a recent story that came out of Mount Royal University, which is here in Calgary, where there was a guy on campus wearing one of those Make America Great Again hats, you know, the Trump campaign hats. And it looked like it was during some kind of a tabling thing. So there's lots of students around, lots of student societies giving information about themselves. And a woman who's a student there went up to this guy and said, you need to remove your hat. You need to take off your hat. And the guy was like, I'm not taking off my hat. I mean, it's just a hat. You know, why would I take this off? And so she says, no, you have to take off your hat. I've spoken to the university president about this. You can either take off your hat now, or you can come with me down to the university president's office and you can take it off there. Which is just hilarious language, right? It's like how you speak to a 2-year-old. You can do this the easy way, or you can do this the hard way, right? Or you can get punished and go to your room and do it there. So she's speaking like this, and this back and forth is going on and going on. Students around are laughing, at the absurdity of this. Some are getting fed up, like, get away from our tables. But the whole thing was videotaped, and it's since made news. It's made international news. This is news in the States. I saw it on national news here in Canada last night. It's making the rounds because it speaks to that whole, politically correct culture on university campuses where a hat is so offensive to somebody that these basically, sort of campus police types come over and say, or not real campus police, but political correctness police come over and say, you need to remove your hat. And so I'm glad that this other kid who was wearing the hat resisted this. Mm-hmm. And, whatever you think about Trump, who cares? It says Make America Great Again. It's a pretty innocuous statement. And so I think that in solidarity with the kid who kept his hat on, I'm going to put on our version, which is much better than the original, Make Alberta Debt-Free Again hat. And, if I do go back to Mount Royal University campus, where I have spoken before, I think I might don the hat.
There you go. And I look forward to bailing you out of the university president's office. Just call and we'll come pick you up. It'll be great.
Yeah, exactly. Well, another element of this is that the woman who told the guy to take off his hat actually was on student council. She was vice president student life, it looks like, based on her Facebook, of a student council. She was actually in sort of a position of power, to borrow a phrase from these politically correct campus types, a position of privilege, might I say, in this situation. So, it's just wildly inappropriate, to try and do that and try and silence somebody in that way. But it does sort of speak to how, these little delicate snowflakes on Canadian university campuses that can't deal with the free exchange of ideas. And as you know, when our Generation Screwed clubs, which are the student outreach arm of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, when they went to Laval campus with a debt clock to show students the debt that they're going to have to pay because their parents' generation are not paying off because the governments are so fiscally irresponsible, the Laval campus ended up kicking them off. So this is something that's really happening across the country, and it's a really important issue. I think that as ridiculous as these examples are, it brings up a really important point that we should discuss.
Yeah, it's a raging debate in the United States. Many op-eds, many websites dedicated to this idea of safe spaces on campuses, and how the pendulum has swung so far the other way now that you're actually censoring free speech, which of course extremely sacred, especially in America. So I love the idea that Trump shaking up the elites down in the States and apparently shaking up the elites on Mount Royal Student Council. On the bright side, the young journalists learning at Mount Royal have a good story for their first fall newspaper of the year, I guess.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, I think it does, it's something that bothers me sort of from a language perspective about this is the type of words that these people use, and by these people, I mean sort of the perpetually offended on university campuses. The woman in question wrote a follow-up Facebook post saying, referring to wearing this hat as a sort of attack. And the idea that wearing a hat would be an attack is obviously silly in and of itself, but the idea that wearing a hat would be more of an attack than going up to a stranger and demanding they remove an item of clothing that you dislike, that's actually less of an attack in this case.
Yeah.
That's a new level of absurdity. I mean, that's completely unacceptable, no matter what the item of clothing is. And so yeah, it's crazy. And it's a raging debate here in Canada too, because I think that, people here too, we're concerned about the freedom of expression, especially on university campuses. We're training the next generation of leaders, probably. So we should probably allow them to be open to new ideas and at least to be exposed to those new ideas without going and saying, "I'm telling on you."
Mm-hmm. Or learn how to debate those ideas in a proper way. This is what breeds generations of internet trolls on Twitter. People who can't possibly debate an issue with a little bit of grace and courage, and understand that folks can think differently. We don't insult the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, even though they think differently than us. I like some of their research, respect some of their positions, or respect all their positions. I don't agree with them, but I enjoy debating them. So I don't understand. You're right. The sensitive snowflake scenario, that's a big concern.
The only way to describe it. I have one more what's new.
Yeah.
I need to grab something for it. We have launched a campaign, or are launching a campaign in Alberta. As you know, we've been very active against the carbon tax here. And a part of that is now we're moving on to the phase where we want to let other people join in and express their dislike for the carbon tax as well. So we've made these bumper stickers, StopTheCarbonTax.ca. And that's exactly where you can go if you want a free bumper sticker. StopTheCarbonTax.ca. I would encourage everybody in Alberta watching this to come and sign up for one of these free bumper stickers, because it's going to help us spread the word and hopefully get that government to actually scrap the carbon tax.
Good initiative. Once the carbon tax is in, it is very difficult to get out. Trust me, from a British Columbia perspective. I know. All right. Well, speaking of stupid taxes, let's talk about the Vancouver vacancy tax. So a few months ago, Gregor Robertson, mayor of Vancouver, uber lefty, trying desperately to reform Vancouver in his greenwashed image. He decided that there was a big problem with rental rates in the city of Vancouver, and rental rates are about 1% right now, a little under. So it is a very tight rental market. But he decided the way to solve it is to force people who have vacant homes or vacant condos to rent them out. And the way he would do this is he would bring in a brand new tax on vacant condos or vacant homes, thus forcing people to either pay a lot of money in taxes, in which he can use it for his green agendas, or actually force you to rent it out. So he went to the provincial government because, of course, it's against the law to do that sort of tax. And he begged the provincial government to bring the tax in themselves and police it and all that. provincial government quite rightly said, no way, Jose, this is a ridiculous thing. It's going to be a quagmire. However, if the mayor of Vancouver wants to do it, we'll amend the Vancouver Charter to allow them to do it. That was several months ago on Wednesday. I think it was Wednesday. It's been a busy week. Gregor Robertson held a press conference to announce all the months of work that have gone into this brand new tax and to announce that it will take effect January 1st, 2017. The problem is, after all this months of work, the tax is as vague as it was the day it was introduced. So let me ask you some questions here, Paige. How would you define vacant? Is vacant a building or a home that hasn't been lived in for 90 days or 120 days or 6 months or a year? We don't know yet. So
good question. I don't know either.
The city staffer who Robertson dragged out to give the quote-unquote technical briefing on this tax, which frankly there aren't a lot of technical details, said that they're looking at about a year. The thing would have to be vacant for a year. Gregor Robertson said some months. That was the exact quote, some months.
Some months.
and if you read the actual report on the tax, they're going to do public consultation this fall and decide it. The problem with this is that how do you prove no one's lived in a house for a year without 24/7 surveillance of that house?
Very creepy.
So what he's done is he set up a audit office, highly paid bureaucrats. It's going to probably end up being a couple $1 million a year when everything's said and done. They are going to rely on self-disclosure on property tax forms. So you'll get a property tax form as an owner of a property, and you'll have to check off some boxes. And if you check off the wrong box, you'll be subject to a 2% on assessment tax, which is $20,000 on $1 million home, which $1 million home sounds expensive, but that is actually lower than the average home price in Vancouver. But it relies on self-disclosure, and we've just gone through literally months of media criticism on real estate rules in Vancouver that relied on self-disclosure. Because guess what? Like Dr. House taught us on that TV show, everybody lies. Some of the most creative writing in Canada is done on tax forms these days. The self-disclosure isn't going to work. They're also going to set up a snitch line so you can snitch on your neighbors if they haven't been home. They're going to create a bunch of exemptions. Snowbirds are going to be exempt. People who have to go abroad to study, people who are in the middle of divorce proceedings, or someone's died, it's in probate, or there was a house that the neighbors complained had been abandoned for a year and a half. Turns out the house has been the subject of a demolition permit that the city of Vancouver has been holding up for, guess how long? A year and a half. No one can occupy it, but they can't tear it down because the city won't let them. It's just a complete mess. And here's how bad this tax policy is. Both the National Post and the Globe and Mail have criticized it and said it's loopy. So
okay, just so I'm clear. So does this survey go out to everybody? Like every single resident of Vancouver has to fill out this, or is it just who gets the survey that they have to fill out?
Every homeowner, so every property with your property tax, you would have to sign this disclosure.
So that's like a whole other level. First of all, a hassle for homeowners, but also a whole other level of bureaucracy that you're right is undoubtedly going to cost a lot of money to process and take a lot of time. So when the Globe and the Post unanimously criticize this, which I think when you've got the two national papers, you're right. Something's probably not right about the policy. What were their main points of criticism?
Exactly everything we've been saying, that you don't know how to define vacancy. There's too many exemptions. It relies on snitching, which never pans out well, especially, look, I was a municipal councillor. It seemed like half our bylaw issues had to do with neighbors who couldn't get along. And, so neighbors are fighting over something else, and then they start nitpicking at each other. This will become part of that. There's strata problems. Some stratas don't allow you to rent out condos.
Stratas being condo boards, which I learned when I moved to BC, but I don't think they're called stratas anywhere else.
Oh, okay. Sorry, condo boards. Yeah. So, there's just so many issues with the tax. And, it's one of those ideas, for me as well, there's a slippery slope here, right? Like, I believe in personal property rights. I believe you buy something, you should be able to use it in a manner you see appropriate, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. What happens if this doesn't boost the vacancy rate like they want? Do we then start forcing people to rent out empty suites in their homes or empty bedrooms? If housing now is a social good, where do we actually draw the line as to how it's taxed and forced out of our hands? So my hope is that the public steps back and says, look, this is as stupid as we thought it was. But my fear is that, Paige, there's no tax as popular as a tax on someone else. And that folks will just kind of turn a blind eye and let Gregor do what he wants to do.
Yeah, well, obviously there's the problems with the vagueness. Some months is possibly the most vague statement ever made. But there's the sort of creepy aspect to it too. It's funny that you brought up stratas or condo boards, because when you're explaining this, I was thinking if you're turning the entire city into a busybody condo board. Condo boards, obviously always notorious for having, got that one neighbor who will call and make a complaint. And this is an issue for people. Just look at the Seinfeld episode, right? Yep. Seinfeld, right about everything. So you're sort of creating that kind of an environment, which is not at all friendly, and it's probably going to create a lot of absolutely unnecessary work just based on people who are busybodies and have nothing else to do, or maybe hold some sort of a grudge against their neighbor. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine how people wouldn't have a problem with this, because there's that busybody aspect, but then there's the following up, which seems like such a violation of your rights to just, it seems creepy. It seems like you're really overstepping here. So you're right that people do not oppose taxes on other people, but hopefully they don't like the infringement on privacy aspect here.
It's going to end up in court, because how do you prove that no one's lived there? I mean, let's say, a young couple gets together, and so he hasn't been home so much because he's been staying at his girlfriend's house and it's vacant. But he's there, a night a month or a night every 5 months. It's still being lived in. So this is the looniness of the Vancouver real estate market, and we're battling away as best we can. And I'm hopeful that this task will be such a boondoggle that no other communities will want to follow along on it.
Well, hopefully. And Christy Clark, the premier, said that they can amend the charter to allow the city to force people to rent. Is that part of it too? That's what's being allowed? They
gave them a tax power saying they could tax vacant suites.
Okay, so that
allowed them to create this basically new class of assessment. So
what if you just don't want to rent? I mean, you're right. It just seems like such an overstepping on private property rights.
Exactly. And this is one of the issues that actually Mark Milkey writes a lot about private property rights. It doesn't get nearly the kind of attention it deserves in Canada, but that's something to go with. Our time is running short on our meeting time here, so let me go straight to waste of the week. And this waste page comes from BC, and it is there are times governments do things, and I wonder, did no one think about this first? So the BC government, we have a highway here that connects the Lower Mainland to the Okanagan. It's called the Coquihalla Highway. It was an engineering marvel when it was built in the 1980s. And it turns out the 30th anniversary just came by. So the politicians decided, and the bureaucrats, that they needed a giant plaque to celebrate the 30th anniversary of this highway and a ceremony. They spent $65,000. I am pleased to report for folks in Alberta, it was a make-work project for some Alberta folks. A crew from Edmonton had to come to actually install the monument.
Thank you.
They got there, the Minister of Transportation was there, and some local dignitaries, and a couple of the cabinet ministers from back in the 1980s when it was built, but no one actually who built the highway was there to enjoy the taxpayer subsidized cupcakes and drinks. $65,000 on a monument celebrating the building of a highway 30 years ago. It's just silly. Governments, if you're listening to this, print out a sign, put it up in your office. Don't spend money on stupid stuff.
Send out a tweet. Yeah. Who cares? Also, that's not really something that is, worth having that kind of a ceremony for. It's a road. I mean, it's great. It's a road. But yeah, send out a tweet, put a Facebook post, take a little picture. I mean, do what the rest of us do when we want to celebrate something.
There's a plaque there. There's a plaque there celebrating its opening. And they've added a 30th anniversary plaque because why not? The Coquihalla has been this history of political stupidity though, or photo ops. It was a toll highway for many years, $10 across to go up and down it. Well worth it just because of the time it cut off from the Trans-Canada. But when they took down those toll booths, the Minister of Transportation famously got into the bulldozer and actually bulldozed down himself one of the toll booths as a photo op. When we asked, why today, like why you're doing that now. I mean, has the highway been paid off or whatever? And there was kind of like, it's ballpark. It was it may have been paid off, years ago or years from now. Who cares? We're taking it down. And it's just like, I don't know what it is about that highway that makes politicians lose all sense of reason. But yeah, that's our waste of the week. And in fact, I think there's a Discovery TV show on the Coquihalla, the guys who work the maintenance on the Coquihalla, Highway to Hell. So if you're across the country, that is the highway. And I should actually look up if they have an episode about the 30th anniversary plaque, because that would be fun.
Yes, you should. That's like, think about all the different things that $65,000 could have been spent on.
Exactly. Well, that's exactly it. Surgeries, bus passes for people with disabilities. There's all sorts of little issues here in BC, little to government, but big to the people who actually interact with government. Yeah. And so when you do something like this, that's taking money out of something else. And next time you drive over a pothole in British Columbia, remind yourself that $65,000 went to this anniversary plaque.
Maybe they can chop up the plaque and fill some potholes.
Exactly. Now you're talking. All right. Well, that is it for this episode of Tax Talk. Paige and I are back. We'll be back next week. You can get you can get this actually on iTunes. We're going to post it to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page. It'll be all over the place. But please subscribe, give us a good rating. We're still the 23rd most popular podcast in the government organizations section. That's in the whole world, Paige. 23rd government organizations. Let's move up to the top 20. I think we can do it. People can check out our website, taxpayer.com, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, everyone.
And don't forget to get your bumper sticker for free, StopTheCarbonTax.ca.
Nothing in life is free anymore except this bumper sticker, so sign up. All right.